Household median in the US today is about $80,000 a year. That's with 2 earners. But the moment both parents have to go to work, they trigger the $32,000 childcare bill because somebody has to watch the kids. The second worker then is not working to get ahead. They're working to pay the person watching their kids so that they can go to work. I think that might explain why so many young people are choosing not to have kids today. I can already see what some of the comments are gonna say. Well, I don't make $140,000 a year and I do just fine. And yes, obviously there's a lot of people that don't make $140,000 a year and still make it work. But this $140,000 number is not supposed to be luxury living. We're not factoring in, iPhones and vacations and Starbucks. The calculation includes 3 things: modest housing, basic healthcare, and bare minimum childcare if both parents work. That's it. There's no luxuries, there's no extras. Now, the second comment I can see people say is, well, not everyone wants to have kids. And that's true. But the original poverty formula was not created for singles. It was created for a household. In the 1960s, every poverty threshold assumed a family structure. And childcare back then was covered by a parent that stayed at home because they did not need a second income. Today, that role costs anywhere between $10,000 to $15,000 a year, conservatively. So if we're sticking to the original logic, childcare has to be included, which is also probably why people are choosing to have kids a lot later than ever before. Now, the third thing I can see people say is, well, just move somewhere cheaper.
If you're a young person and you can't afford to live here, then maybe you should not live here. I mean, that is a real thing. I know that we've now grown up in a society that says that you deserve to live where you grew up, but the reality is that the history of America is almost literally the opposite of that. The history of America is you go to a place where there is opportunity.
Now, here's reality. Even the cheapest states in the country now have a housing to income ratio that is historically very high. There's a national shortage of affordable housing, so moving across the country is not going to magically fix the whole economic system where the price of shelter has grown faster than income for decades. Now, another thing I can see people say is, well, healthcare shouldn't be included. That inflates the number. But in the 1960s, healthcare was only about 5% of a family's budget. Today, between premiums and deductibles and out-of-pocket costs, it can take up to 15 to 20% of your income. And it's not an optional thing. You have to have healthcare. If the original formula included the biggest essential expenses of its time, then the modern calculation has to do the same. Another thing people might say is, the $140,000 number is inflated by big coastal cities. But this calculation actually uses national medians, not New York or San Francisco. If you used only major cities like that, the poverty line would be way higher. And maybe the biggest objection I could see is, well, you're just changing the definition to push a specific narrative. But this is literally the government's original poverty formula that they use today. It's the same logic. It is the same math. The only thing that's changed is the modern reality that I'm plugging into it. If the economy evolves, but the formula doesn't, then it doesn't make sense anymore. And obviously the last thing I can see people say is, the article was debunked because the author didn't use realistic numbers. And I think there's some truth to that because it really depends on your assumptions and your costs, which not everyone will agree with, but I think that's sort of missing the bigger point. All right, so if you made it this far, here's what I think. I think the reason that all of this matters is because without understanding how our reality looks in a way that's accurate, we will never be able to improve on anything. Especially because on paper, the government says things like, well, unemployment's low, inflation's coming down, the GDP's growing, the poverty line hasn't moved, right? So everything's fine. But none of these metrics describe the real cost of life in 2025. Like inflation, for example. Yes, it is slowing down, but that doesn't make housing cheaper. It doesn't erase the price increases over the last few years. Slowing inflation just means prices are not going up as fast as they used to, not that they went back down. So when the government says inflation is under control, people look around and go, okay, but I'm still paying more for rent, more for groceries, more for childcare, more for insurance, and more for everything else. Or for example, if we look at things like unemployment, It's at historically low levels, yes, which sounds great. But most people are not saying, do I have or don't I have a job? They're saying, does my job actually cover my life? And when their incomes have not kept up with the cost of housing or healthcare or college, then full employment, as economists like to describe it, doesn't translate to feeling like financial security. It just means people are working, sometimes multiple jobs even, and still struggling. Even if we look at the GDP, which economists love to measure, it doesn't necessarily reflect reality. Like the economy, for example, can grow because corporations are making more money, because tech stocks go up because they're circulating money and passing it around to each other, which artificially increases their values. But the reality is, it did not increase what really contributes to growth, which is productivity. None of that tells you whether the average family of four can afford a house, save money, or get ahead. And looking at this, I think sort of explains how it's possible for the macro, which is the big picture things, to look amazing, while the micro, or the reality, doesn't feel as good as the numbers say they should, right? When the government tells you the poverty line is $31,000, so if you're making more, you're doing great. But your rent is $2,000 a month. Health insurance is $1,800 a year. Childcare is $12,000 a year. So you start to think, am I crazy? Am I doing something wrong? Am I not watching enough Graham Stephan videos? No, you're not, right? The assumptions are probably wrong. And that brings me to the bigger problem. If the poverty line is outdated, and maybe the middle class definition is outdated, and economic indicators that economists measure don't reflect reality, then how do we measure that reality? What is the middle class? And here's the part I don't want you to take away from this video. This does not mean you have to make $140,000 a year to live a good life. The whole point of the number, which I think Michael Green was trying to make, is not to depress you. Instead, it's to show you that the system is using the wrong input and that in reality, the real poverty line for a family of four is probably not as high as $140,000. But it's definitely not as low as $31,000 like the government says it is. So here's what I will say. If you've ever felt like you're not getting ahead, but you're working super hard, I don't think you're just imagining it. And there are things that I don't think we can control. For example, we can't control the price of housing, can't control healthcare, can't control inflation costs, can't control childcare costs. We cannot control GDP or government formulas. But that doesn't mean you should just give up. You can still have control over your savings rate. You can control your investing habits. You can control whether you stay in the market or not, whether you automate contributions, whether you buy assets or liabilities. And here's something the government formulas do not account for. Wealth does not come from income alone. Wealth comes from time. It comes from compounding. And that has nothing to do with the poverty line. You could have a household making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. And if they invest consistently from age 25 to 65, they will end up with more wealth than a household making $150,000 that never invests at all. The old poverty formula can't measure that. It can't measure discipline. It can't measure financial literacy. It cannot measure what happens when someone decides to invest consistently for decades and decades. And that's why the most important lesson about money that I've ever learned, and the one I always think about, is to be informed and to be financially literate and to stay in the market and keep investing, because it's the one thing that still works. It's the one thing that still builds wealth reliably. It's ownership. Ownership of literally anything that grows faster than inflation. The poverty line measures survival, and I think investing measures possibility. So yes, the old metrics are definitely outdated. And yes, life is way more expensive than it used to be. But here's the thing I want you to walk away with. Your financial future is not decided by any of this. It's decided by your habits. If you can build the right habits today, you can outperform people who make more than you. You can outsave them, you can outinvest them, you can out-compound them. That's the system you can take advantage of today. Having said that though, I would